It's the largest we've ever done here. You're dealing with 300 years worth of botanical art, exclusively devoted to the Australian flora, and you're covering the entire continent of Australia, and there are more than 400 works in this exhibition.
Who are some of the big names or the most significant names that we've got here?
Because you're starting in the 18th century, if I reel off some of the names from the beginning, you're talking about people like Sidney Parkinson, who travelled with Captain Cook on the Endeavour. You're talking about Ferdinand Bauer, whose nickname is the Leonardo of botanical art. He travelled with Matthew Flinders on Flinders' expedition to discover the south part of Australia in around 1801. You're talking about Pierre-Joseph Redoute, who was Empress Napoleon's favourite botanical artist. His nickname is the Raphael of botanical art. A little bit later, you're talking about artists like Ellis Rowan, Margaret Flockton, Louisa Ann Meredith. A little bit further on, you're talking about artists like Margaret Stones and Celia Rosser, and then so on into the contemporary botanical art world. So it's there's a real feast to see here.
Botanical art was originally intended to document flora scientifically.
Yes.
How do you think the role of botanical art has changed, given that we've got digital cameras that can be purchased quite cheaply and produce really high quality images?
Yeah, well, that's actually a very interesting question, and I'd have to say that every single, or just about every single image in this exhibition is still a scientific botanical. They're still there, existing to serve a purpose in a botanical scientific context. Still today, scientists will make use of botanical artists because it's the only way that they can get an image that's got something that might be magnified to 250 times next to the plant in its one-to-one size, where the colour can be graded and what have you. Photography actually has its own issues in terms of colour, especially if you're resolving 3 or 4 images on the same plate. So there is something quite unique about a hand-delivered, hand-crafted image placed by hand on the page, with one person actually controlling the colour directly in line of sight between the plant and the paper.
Standing beside me is a woman I've been told is one of the most recognisable names in the world of botanical art. Hello, Jenny Phillips.
Hello.
Jenny, you grew up in the dry country of Swan Hill. What attracted you to the botanical art form?
I've been asked this and I've thought about this such a lot over the years, because it's not an art form I even knew about until I'd started doing it, until after my first exhibition, really. I think it goes back to my earliest memories of plants, and I was about 2 when we moved to Maryborough from Bort, and then moved on to Swan Hill, and it was through a phenomenal drought, and my parents loved fishing, and we'd go out every weekend up into New South Wales, and I'd see the sheep just dying in the paddocks, and it was a very impressionable thing for a young child to see. And the saltbush blowing, and I just loved trees and green, and we'd sit by the dry riverbanks. This was soon after the war, but I longed for gardens, and Mum was a great gardener, and we'd go home and it was like going into a little oasis. So I felt just an affinity with plants. I just saw a beauty in them that I didn't see in other things around me, and the more I looked, the more I saw, and the more enchanted I became. And I've had some wonderful teachers through school who took us through the life cycle of plants in grade 3 or something. I was intrigued with that. I loved botany at school, and then I decided when I married and lived on a farm at Kyneton, I thought I'll paint the plants the way I loved drawing them in botany and showing the detail, because I don't think anyone in the world's ever done it. I didn't know. We didn't have coffee table books, we didn't have Google, we didn't have computers, we didn't have colour television even, and so I was able to transport myself, I think, into just another world with it, and I still do. I still love it.
Your pieces have painstaking detail. How do you go about getting that sort of detail? What type of patience is involved?
Really good music. I think I tend to play the same music over and over, and I turn that on and I get straight into a zone to paint with, and then the longer I'm painting, I get more and more involved within the plant. And the harder you look, the more you see. It's not It's the opposite of Impressionism. I like to think you can look at the painting and you take a magnifying glass to it and you'll see as much information through the magnifying glass when you look at the painting as you would if you looked at the plant. I don't paint through a magnifying glass, but I do study the plant well, often under the microscope and with a magnifying glass before I start painting, and really get to know it so I know exactly what I'm painting, so I can try and make it look as real as possible, as though you could run your hands between the stem and the flowers and the leaves and the stems and the twigs and things. It has to live for me when I'm painting it.
Jenny, your paintings are considered highly collectible. You've got 5 pieces in this exhibition. Let's take a look at one of them. Talk me through this piece.
This is a Eucalyptus Pyrrha Formas, and it grows in the desert. I think it's going to become a great beach grower's plant because it loves a dry, sandy soil. It's called the rose of the desert often. A very large flower, well, I'm going to talk inches now, but it's probably about 5 centimetres across. It's very waxy, coated to stop evaporation coming from it, but an extraordinary plant. Some of the hardest wood I've ever struck in a eucalypt. And the extraordinary shape of like 2 little Gothic arches almost, with every top of every one has that oblique stem. So it's an amazing plant. And when I paint something like this, I like to try and show absolutely every facet of it. The fact that it has the farine protection to the powdery, waxy protection on the gum nut, and the little oil glands all over it, and little lines of growth around the stems, and then to show the dissections of it, because the longitudinal sections of it, because I love to see the functional design within plants. I love to see how it's all packaged and how it moves and grows and what happens. I love design, I love colour, I love everything about plants really.
How much room is there in this sort of contemporary renaissance of botanical art for you as an artist to be creative?
There's a huge, the earliest records go back to the 2nd century before Christ. You can find botanical drawings, but it was actually to identify medicinal plants and the uses of plants medically, which the Aboriginals also had too, which the early primitive peoples in every country had medicinal uses for their plants, and they started to draw them and record them so that people knew what to go and hunt and gather to use. The scientific part of it, I think if people studied plants more, there's probably nothing in architecture, in line, in colour, in design, in functional use, in engineering that you won't find within the plant world if you look hard enough. There's a reason for it all. There's a very good reason for everything in plants, and it's all about propagation. It's all about continuing the species, and we've a lot to learn from it. I don't think we'll ever learn it all, because each door you open takes you into another door that becomes just as fascinating. I think the work I love still has a botanical integrity, yes, to adapt it to make people see it in a way they've never seen plants before. That is something that I aspire to be able to do, because I think when you open a window in somebody's mind, it's the most marvellous thing you can give that person.
Has there been a plant that you've stumbled upon that's just been like striking gold for you?
Yes, but it can be a weed. It can be looking at the way that weed functions and survives. I think quickly coming to mind is a little native geranium that I've struggled. I garden. I love gardening, and I've developed a large garden on the farm in Kyneton through the hard way of carting loads of manure every week and trying to build up the soil. And to see this exquisite little geranium coming up out of the gravelly, sandstony clay side of the road on a very hot day amongst the dead eucalypt leaves, and this just divine little flower coming up, and you think, God bless it, the struggle it's had to survive. I think there are a lot of people in the world could identify with that flower. But it mirrors, the plant world mirrors people. That's when I get excited, when something moves me like that, to see something, or wonderful design, or something totally different from something I've seen. But no matter what plant you put in front of me, when I sit with it long enough, and I tend to do that, I tend to get to know a plant. I like to get to know a plant well before I paint it, so that Because often you'll start something and you'll get the painting done in a week, and 3 weeks later it looks absolutely spectacular and you think, I wish I'd known it was going to do that. So then you want to paint it again, and this goes on. I want to write a book, but there need to be another about 20 hours in every day for me to have